All right. And hello, welcome back to another episode of the Metacast. Today I am joined by Rogue, Frontier Philosophy from Twitter. You should definitely go check him out. Some really interesting stuff that he's been doing. We connected every once in a while. I'll do spaces. I think some of the content, I guess we have some mutuals in common. And I wrote this article on refuting techno-transhumanism. And, it sounds like this is really up Rogue's alley. He's been doing some really interesting stuff with, I think he calls it the Luddite right. So I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit, about your philosophy and your work and what you're doing, but excited to have you on.
Thank you kindly for welcoming me into your home on such a wonderful summer's day. I'm Rogue. I'm an American educator with graduate focus in literary education, and I've been working overseas for 7 years with various modern tribal populations, teaching literature, philosophy, communications. Currently, I'm based here in Central Asia, trying to build businesses, develop nations, and all of this exposure to tribal folk has led me into writing in the Twitter space and trying to write primarily about the rebirth, let's say, of American tribalism, or a return to our frontier conditions where we can unify our people, not under conservatism nor progressivism, but under our authentic traditions as ethnic Americans.
I love that, because I think one of the biggest kind of flags that I try to fly when it comes to, having conversations in the online sphere is that it's not about adopting aesthetics or edgy aesthetics from the past, or, saying, oh, we have to do it this way, the way that, other cultures or groups did it or something like that, but learning from what worked in the past and then building something new, something that's adapted to the modern environment. And we're in a time where, technology and all the kind of vice and kind of temptation that represents is just, it's immediately available. It's kind of, its most potent form. And if we're going to be able to kind of navigate the future, we have to be able to kind of address, not only what are the transcendent things that always work with humans and with culture and with community and society and all these kinds of things, but how do we adapt that in the modern world, right? And sometimes that's not incorporating things that are, readily available, or leaning into them in the right way. So
I think primarily the Americans are a very unique type of folk. It is very unusual to have a mass migration of European people unified together in their own nation. Obviously, we are really the only country to do that. You could say the same about some maybe in South America, but the Americans are uniquely distinct in the fact that we present a founding mythology that we no longer practice. And I find that very odd. So, for example, the majority narrative of America up from 1600 to 1800s, maybe early 1900s, was relatively the same, where you took this rite of passage over the ocean in which you said, I'm making a break with my previous nation to pursue some religious extremist ideology. And that focused on asceticism, where I'm renunciating modernity and renunciating progress of my previous empire. I'm coming into nature, I'm integrating with nature, and I'm living amongst my folk in a relative tribal community that is very distinct from the other pockets of, in this case, Christian extremists, to worship my God, whatever that might mean. And along the way, we integrate with a sort of barbarism, if you will, of the indigenous Indian tribes. And doing that ethnogenicized us into a unique type of person. Now, that myth changed in the 1900s, in which we said, whoa, hold on. We have no longer an ethnic identity. Now we're a nation of immigrants. We're a melting pot. And as a melting pot, we completely discard the frontier as if it almost never happened. And we're going to live in cities and suburbs now. And we're going to proclaim that this is always how it should have been. And this was always our ideal. And I say, whoa, that's very strange. We completely shifted from asceticism to materialist maximism. Now, that's a very strange phenomenon. And it appears, if we follow this phenomenon, we have been removed further and further and further from our traditional founding ethos in such a way it's almost unrecognizable and unable to return. And this has caused a very serious division in our nation and material focus, which has almost plagued our people in a sense that we have become the antithesis of our founding stock. And I primarily would like to see a movement formed that revives our authentic traditions, not some imaginary aesthetic. Oh, the Art Deco of 1910, the height of civilization, 1910. You know, that thing that happened 20 minutes ago, that was what made us a people. Or,
Mm,
oh, World War II, we need to go back to the 1950s where I can have my chemical castrated wife and her perfect hair all up on her painkillers, and we can sit inside all day and sing Kumbaya. I have no interest in that sort of movement. And I
mm,
was very disappointed in the online space when I arrived because I was told that we were going to herald in a dissident age of excellence and return to traditions, only to find that a tradition was formed 20 minutes ago. I'd like to see us go far, far more into the past, and I've taken it upon myself to try to find an exact sort of traditional American ethos to rally behind. I'm certainly tired of division of my people. Is it communism that is our savior? It is the 1950s? No, it's simply a return to our authentic ethnic traditions. It's that simple.
mhm. I think there's a lot of credence to that idea. I think a lot of understanding a lot of rebuilding healthy societal structures is looking back into the past and what was lindy and what works, but also to this kind of like very strongly biologically linked element of culture, right? Where it's, there was a filter in who came to the United States initially. And to your point, right, it was frontiersmen, it was pioneers, it was people who were kind of looking to be kind of like religious extremists, as you're kind of talking about there, right? And so it's selected for a very specific type of person. And I think that one of the things that's often lost in a lot of the kind of the mainstream conversations about things like culture and people is that, our evolution, it was never, it's never solely, it's not physical. It's not solely physical. Right. And there is kind of like a way of being that is uniquely ideal for each different group of people, right? Like you would never hear people say, oh, we've got to westernize parts of Asia, right? Like I think like the mainstream approach these days is very much like, yeah, let Asians stay Asian, right? And I think similarly there is kind of a need for a rediscovery of what is American, right? And not just, to your point, these kind of like 1900s and on kind of art aesthetics or whatever it is, but like biologically, what were we filtered for when we first came here, right? It is this kind of pioneer frontiersman, kind of explorer kind of vibe, right? And I think that there's a lot to be said for kind of rediscovering those roots, rediscovering what works for those type of people, and then trying to build that into whatever is going to be viable in the future.
Sure, that's you could say the main premise. That's what diversity is supposed to mean, where I can go to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, nations to an American that would seem completely identical, but yet they're divided and allowed to practice their very unique definitions of their tribal culture. And I can go to Korea and they'll be, oh my goodness, what will they'll be? They'll be Korean. And I can go to Germany and they'll be German, and Americans be Americans. But now, this is a horrible, horrible catastrophe I learned when I was living primarily among the Vietnamese tribes, where the American and the Vietnamese and the Japanese, they're the same person now. We
Mm,
only have the same goals. We only have the same aesthetic. You might doll yourself up in a cowboy cloak, but you certainly don't practice a frontiersman ethos. The Vietnamese may have some connection with their tribal heritage. Let's say the Hmong. We have a large percentage of Hmong, primarily based in California, that came over from the Vietnam War period. And this is a very a wealthy tribal group in the north of Vietnam. They're traders primarily, and they have a very distinct culture. And they might wear their very uniquely endowed tribal clothing around America, but they don't live in their communal capacity anymore, and they don't know how to build bamboo huts. And we can go from nation to nation to nation, from culture to culture, from tribe to tribe, and we can see that every single aspect of our identities has become exactly completely the same, where we have the
Mm.
same polyester clothing mass produced by the Chinese. We have the same artificial goals, which is to sacrifice our lives as acolytes in the religion of progress to advance a technological system. And everything that we do is governed by this sort of entity of progress to serve it rather than be individual actors and expand our unique identities. And when I've been working in Asia, I see this shift, and this is a very unique perspective I get to have. When I work with nomads, I get to see what that looks like, the end of the American frontiers period. What did that look like to go from
Mm.
1899 to 1900? And I can see that with the nomads who moved from, in Central Asia, we have the nomadic period, the Soviet period, and the modern period. And I can see directly what has happened to the American by reflecting on these people, which is when you remove a person from their ethnic tradition, in our sense as Americans, that's agrarian farmers on a frontier region. You put them in suburbs and cities, and you can immediately see the total identity of the person wash away
Mm.
in a Central Asian perspective. Very few of my students, for example, understand even something as basic as riding horses anymore. These people have ridden horses for thousands of years and they were the best in the world, but they don't remember that. And even if
Mm.
you're not doing something as simple as riding a horse, how that changes you to being, deeply cemented in sedentary life. If I don't have to ride horses anymore, well, I don't have to train as hard physically. If I'm not training as hard physically, I can let go of the arts of horseback wrestling or let go of traditional bowmanship. If I don't need to use bows anymore, I need to use craftsmen. And we call that progress, but that's actually a deletion of a skill and of
Mm.
a part of your ancestry. Just as for the American, once you remove him from his farms and you don't allow him to practice his agrarian self-sufficiency, he becomes the same as everyone else in the world. And what we call
Mm.
progress is actually a removal from ancestral lands, a removal from ethnic cultural practices. This then you remove someone from their culture and their unique identity, then you break up the family. The family has no reason to exist either because that's an impediment to progress. I can't have a collective identity that's attached to my people. Now I need to just serve progress. I need to go out and I need to get a career. I can't be self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency, of course, if you go live in a frontier cabin, you're seen as insane. Well, we did that
Mm.
in America for 400 years. It doesn't matter now. You're a loser. You need to be seeking political power, ooh, whatever that might mean. You need to be retaking institutions. Well, why are those institutions there? And it would appear to me, after my time, again, working with these tribal folks, just like the Soviets set up, where they're building civilizations, not for you to thrive, but they're ripping you up from your ancestral lands and they're forcing you to be a new Soviet man. You're not an
Mm.
American frontiersman. You're not a Kazakh nomad anymore. You're a modern person. And this appears to be this great cancer to me. And I try to live all my life rejecting it, but I find myself just as entranced in it as everyone else. And I think the error of our ways is in America, we have this diversity, equity, and inclusivity program, and we can see all of these horrible mixing of castes as a result, where our heritage Americans are flushed out of every position in earth, and we're replaced by these illegal immigrants, even at the worst case scenario, being flooded. All of our Western nations are being flooded by foreigners, and these people are taking over. Now, I have nothing to say against foreigners, as I myself am a very foreign man in foreign nations. But of course, it is strange how we have this massive shift to where our people almost have no control over our nation, our national identity, and our ways of life have been stamped out of existence. And this is the same for every nation. And I'd like to blame that sort of shift not on a group of people, but rather on the technological system itself as having a will that forces people to be divided from their heritage identity and to serve it. And a mixing is actually creation of a state of sameness where everybody becomes the same so that you have no other choice but to conflate your motivations with the expansion of the system. Under everything that you do, this becomes the primary goal. So,
Mm.
those are some general topics I've thought very deeply about living with my modern tribal folk. And I'd like to steer the conversation in that way.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to jump into this because I think that you and I share a lot of our beliefs, but I think we've slightly different approaches to what we're trying to achieve, and I'm very curious to get into what kind of do you think is the practical path. But before we dive too much deeper into that, I'd be curious to just get a little bit of background on yourself. Like, how did you find yourself walking this path or getting into this like understanding of the world?
Sure. Well, when I was in university, that was back when Trump first got elected, 2016. I should have been a junior. And I was very deeply concerned. I spent a lot of my time with women primarily. And women have a tendency to talk, which, God forbid, women talk. I mean, it's a horrible travesty to everyone, really. And when the girls I would date would talk, they would always espouse these high ideals of communism. The world could all be solved if we shook hands and gave the government power. And I said, well, we just elected Trump the president. That would mean we would have communism under Trump. And clearly, you don't even like Trump. So why would we be doing that sort of thing? And all these political tensions. I'd see people rioting on the streets for hours on end. I even went to an anti-Trump riot to pick up women once, and there was a woman who was throwing up on the sidewalk because she was so horribly strucken that some individual could come into a presidency that she didn't agree with. And I saw all these ailments with my people, and I thought I really would like to find a way where my people don't have to fight anymore. I think this is so stupid. We become divided over these extremes. And the
Mm.
extreme of communism, I kept trying to talk to people. Have you read Marx? Have you read Che Guevara? Have you read Ho Chi Minh? Have you read Mao? Have you read Pol Pot? No, 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 no. And I couldn't figure out how you could believe something without living it. And I couldn't understand how you could believe something that you almost knew nothing about, as if you were programmed to do that. And I said to myself, I don't want to lose my people to this ideology for foreigners. I'm just going to throw myself in a position where I can live with communists in real life. So I packed up my things and went off to the country of Vietnam, which, sure, maybe they're socialist on paper, but I would certainly think of them as communist in the best sense, or at least you could on paper. And I spent most of my time in Vietnam rather than living in cities, trying to go out into the wild regions. I took my motorcycle and my camera, and I was very deeply invested in these sort of ancient provinces, along the Chinese border, in particular, places like Lao Cai, or places like Cao Bang, or areas in Hao Long Bay related to the island of Cat Ba with the Viet Hai. And I had this very rural existence. And being totally cut off, I would say, from the outside world in respect, and thrown back thousands of years into the ancient past, having time to reflect on their changes, moving from, let's say, the tribes to the Chinese to the French taking over, learning their mythos, and really thinking about when they were guerrillas led by Ho Chi Minh with the Viet Minh and Viet Cong fighting the French, the Japanese, and the Americans. I found that interesting because the left wing in our nation becomes devoutly communist, and the right wing just complains all day. They complain all day. How do you complain about something? How do you complain about something? I live with people who formed underground cities to destroy the Americans, Chinese, and French with booby traps and bones, sticks and stones. And you complain instead of starting a guerrilla war to reclaim your nation? What the hell? These people are 4'11", living in holes, eating taro roots for 30 years to kill us, and you have the audacity to not even protect your own border? How the hell does that work? We're American. We're better than everybody from birth, and you can't even go down to a border and secure it with a volunteer force, inciting a historical precedent of bounty hunting and scalping laws that we use to expel native indigenous tribes from our lands to create our nation? No. So I couldn't figure it out. Why were the little Vietnamese able to defeat all of our men, and we sit in cities, do Excel spreadsheets, and let millions of invaders in? Bam. That thought leads us to the coronavirus times. You're telling me 90% of the world took a vaccination lock themselves in their home with zero resistance, not even those Vietnamese guerrilla warriors. Oh, that's strange. No
Mm.
African warlord overthrew their government for mandating vaccinations against their gangs. That's weird. Americans, the freest people on earth, 90% acceptance rate of a vaccine with a very easy religious exemption. You're
Mhm.
telling me you could be exempt from something and you didn't do it? And you just listen to them. Oh, it's fine if Trump Operation Warp Speed. That's okay. Trump, our guy said we should kill ourselves. That's fine if our guy says it. Oh, so the entire world now is just controlled by the same people. And there is no group of people, but rather their will is in complete alignment. And then I, of course, had to make a philosophy. Well, if no one rebelled against a very tyrannical period of lockdown, forced vaccination. In Vietnam, they were throwing people into refurbished prison camps. That was fun. I had to avoid a refurbished prison camp used to torture the American POWs in the South. That was cool. And all these things all over the world. I couldn't figure it out. So I think the only practical thing to do when you have 90% of the population that is poisoned in various ways, be it from GMO foods or be it from vaccination, which is a eugenics project, or when people are too sedentary to take action and form a resistance movement like the Vietnamese living in foxholes in the ground. I think it's all just silly. I think it's silly to continue playing this game for control of poisoned food and poisoned people. I think what's very necessary is to unify with allies and take an extreme survival approach where you're focused on self-sufficiency, where you're focused on reviving that tribal ideal, the Puritans, the Amish, Mennonites, the Quakers, going back into a group setting and saying, we want no part of this fake and gay illusion. Not only do we want no part in it, we don't want to uphold any of its values, and we will form our own way. And this way will be completely detached from you poisoned people with your poisoned blood. And I don't want to associate in any of these fake games anymore where I devote my life toward stacking Excel sheets, spreadsheets, onward and forever through my generations. There must be a better way to live, a more meaningful way to live. And so I try to sort of just reverse engineer, well, what did our ancestors do? What are the myths of the American that we need to revitalize? And how can that help people form their own self-sufficient settlements? And of course, you can't just talk about these things. You must do them. You cannot hide behind an anonymous account in the wilds of the online space. You must go in and reintegrate with the traditions and conquer a land and make it your own and order it into existence. So that's what I'm trying to do both in real life as a practitioner, trying to revitalize here in Central Asia and American frontiersman ethic, but with, let's say, centrifuges and a perfume of Mongolian steppe warlord nomadicism, an American frontier agrarian plantation style, something like that. I have to build
Mm.
that. It'll take me 10, 20 years, but then I can say, I've done it. I've lived my philosophy in real life. You got to
Mm.
see it. Congratulations. You can do that too. Here's what I recommend.
Mhm. No, and I absolutely agree with kind of a lot of what you said there. To me, oh man, yeah, COVID was such a clear signal for how complacent so many people were. I worked in New York City. I commuted in and out of the city, and you know, during that time, there was a point where everything was locked down, and so people weren't really traveling. But when the company I was working for opened back up again, I'd travel in on the train. It was amazing to see the degree to which people were following the mask mandates, or acting like, oh no, like I could die, you know, traveling or whatever. And now we almost don't even think about it, right? It's crazy to see anyone with a mask nowadays. Even I do a little bit of traveling by plane, and every once in a while you'll see someone with a mask, but it's almost been completely memory hold, as if it never happened. But that degree of complacency and acceptance was pretty amazing to see. And it was very interesting, like going sans mask on public transit, even at the height of that, and kind of seeing people's reactions, because I think you could really tell who was just kind of getting along, or accepting this, and who was willing to kind of at least stand up a little bit about it. But to your point, trying to build something apart, I think this is a a point that I try to stress in a lot of my content is I don't see a solution coming from the top down. If anything, the solution is going to come from the bottom up. And that means kind of this unglamorous hard work of, to your point, putting your money where your mouth is, right? If you believe something, the truest incarnation of belief is action. So, you can't, it's really hard when you have, to your point, a bunch of people complaining on the internet, but they're not doing anything. They're not taking any action. And, I can commiserate with the idea of like, how, I'm not going to go out and do anything extreme or anything like that. But I think that there is a viable solution, not in destruction, but in creation, right? The creation of alternative systems, communities and fraternities, families are a big part of what I talk about. And, I see what you're doing as, that kind of along those same ideas, but has this very exclusive focus on finding something that resonates with kind of that deeper genetic lineage of frontiersmen and pioneers. And I think that it's an element. It's pretty unique. I haven't seen anyone take that kind of aggressive a stance on it. I also think your story is very unique in the fact that you don't see a lot of people who, again, are taking their beliefs and putting them into real action. So it's very cool to kind of see that play out. But I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about kind of going back to this idea of how do you take these ideals that you're understanding and extracting from both American history, but also from these different cultures that you're encountering, things that work either now or then, and how do you see those being adapted and made viable in our modern age? Like, what are kind of the key structures or philosophies or strategies that you think are going to carry this goal of yours of building kind of a revitalizing frontier philosophy into the future?
Sure. Now, that question, I don't know, makes me feel embarrassed almost because I just got finished last week teaching Plato's Republic to 79 IQ third worlders, which, as you can imagine, did not go very well. And so I had to, look myself in the mirror and say, my God, look at yourself. You're trying to teach Plato to primitives again. You can't do it. It's not real. These things aren't practical enough for people. You dumb idiot. They're going to sell things at a bazaar and make millions of dollars importing and exporting goods. That's what they do. That's their traditional mentality. And you're teaching them Plato. God, doesn't work. So I always have to try to hold myself back to it, primarily because I work with Evola, trying to revive this traditional thing. It sounds all razzle dazzle and it sounds too high in the sky. So I have to curtail my ambitions. Not everyone can be a guardian class, for example. But in my own way, I built my philosophy with a very, very close friend of mine. His family, my family, we both came over from the Mayflower and kind of found each other again after some time. The only difference between our ancestral histories is I have some family who came over in 1911 to work with Edison, and he has a family that came over and then transformed into Daniel Boone. So he's literally like the one of the heirs of this Daniel Boone lineage. So he's way more extreme than I am, which became quite a problem. People often look at my work and say, wow, this guy's very strange, completely trying to discard technology. No, you don't understand. I use technology. I already built everything in person already. My friends are so extreme, they won't even use electricity. So I'm like the raging leftist liberal of my group, which is very difficult for people to understand. The last thing I spoke of with my group when they're going off into the jungle, I mean, it's quite literally like, we're in a mountain at the peaks of this valley at the height of these jungle forests, and they said, listen, next time you're going to see us, if at all, we're going to be living in loincloths. We're going to go full savage. I mean, we're not coming back. You understand? So you go. We understand you need to be a little bit more aristocratic and modern because of your European DNA that has come to America in the 1900s. We've been here for too long. We have to go make our own settlement in the jungle now. Goodbye. So I've already done everything in person. We had a wonderful settlement in Armenia that we built together, and we were living there. Well, they were living there for some time. I was finishing up my graduate degree in America. What we did basically was in the country of Armenia, we went to a very far province away in the forest that was several hours away from civilization, bought a big plot of land, several hectares. And what you do is you just literally homestead. It's not complicated. You just homestead, get yourself completely self-reliant with water. We had an Olympic swimming pool level of water from the mountains every day, I was told. We had something like that. You get your farm animals in a row. Farming is not complicated. You just do everything yourself. And what you do skills that you forgot. What does that mean? You pick up a fucking shovel, you dig a hole, you put vegetable seeds into the ground. These are not revolutionary ideas. We don't need to communicate the ideals of farming and food sufficiency, but that's basically it. You find your allies, you go on frontier land. In America, I recommend West Virginia, where you can get land for $1,000 per acre. By the way, you go to the forest, you clear the forest, you put the logs from the forest into a cabin, and then you order the land to make it produce. This is nothing new. Now, it is only the fact that I have been, I had a schism with my clan. They said, we can't live in Armenia. It's too modern for us. And I said, we're in bloody Armenia. How could it be more primitive? And they said, no, no, we must go further into the beyonds. We must find a jungle region and we must go off and conquer the jungle. Goodbye, good sir. And I said, fine. I guess in your image, I will make our school of thought that we would have. We'll call it Mennonite imperialism for your love of the Amish communities. We will try to focus on making two schools, the Orthodox approach where you're in loincloth mode, you're leaving everything behind, going into the jungle, which is quite literally what they did. This is not hyperbole. This is not a joke. And then you have a more liberal form, which I am trying to build now, which says essentially, look, we have tribal lineage in America where you were a Puritan, a Quaker, an Amish, etc. We have one group, one in our nation who is always successful. That is the Mennonites. That is the Amish. Their birth rates are phenomenal. They're always increasing. Their ancestral skills, they have them. Not only do they have ancestral skills passed down from line after line after line, but everyone knows them. And they are so skilled that if you take out America in a nuclear explosion, they'll be just fine because they have the knowledge. It's okay. The Amish shall inherit the earth. And of course, they will inherit the earth whether you like it or not. They have no vaccinated damage, which means they will continue to reproduce exponentially. They have their own land. They have their own community. They're so successful, they still speak Pennsylvanian Dutch as a dialect, which means that they've kept every aspect of their tradition down to the language. And these people are so successful that they even go places like Peru, Belize. It's the 1980s. They don't want to live in America anymore. They go down to Belize. Belize says, we're happy to give new people citizenship. Come down, we'll even give you land. So what do some of the Orthodox Amish do? They say, we're too comfortable in America. We've got to go. Bye. Make a break with America, 1980s. Boom, go to Belize. Live in Belize for 20 years. Wait a second. I think we got comfortable again. We got to go to Peru. We got to go to the Amazon. And there's literally groups of Amish folk that are going in and terraforming the Amazon and making their Dutch settlements there again. That is my representation of a Christ-like figure, where you are so perfectly in alignment with your folk traditions that God is smiling upon you with high birth rates, high skill, a completely self-sufficient population. And you can go to the ends of the earth and live this philosophy. And that's what I try to do. Now, I'm not very good at it, of course, because I'm talking to a nice gentleman here over the video phone. But in my own way, what I would practice here in Central Asia, I have to go to it's very complicated for me. I'm very, very, very distraught by the thought of it. It scares me to death. But what I need to do is I need to pick a province and I need to purchase land, maybe between 3 different provinces. I would have to find local workers to basically be serfs and pledge allegiance to me. They would move between these 3 areas of land. This type of practice is called semi-nomadism. It's what's typically practiced here, moving from area to area to 3-month increments. We typically live in villages in the winter seasons because it's too cold for the mountains. And then the wintertime, we move to the mountains and back and forth, trying to master this sort of desert tundra climate. So as an American, I have to build some type of stabilized farm, probably going to be like an old plantation. I really like the tobacco industry here, for example. That might be my cash crop to rally behind, give people work. And then I need to convert my currency into the new currency, the traditional currency of livestock. And I would have to have people that are managing that for me. So, unfortunately, because my group has left for the jungle and I'm all alone, the best I can do is personally implement a plantation design. What you would do in the American context is, again, just farm and try to have your ideal be a kind of Amish settlement. I prefer to live a little bit more loosely. I like to use nomadic sort of traditions to move from area to area. In the American context, no longer could do such a thing. You can technically move as a nomad between national parks and get on horseback and go from area to area. But
Mhm.
unless we're making a sort of our own supply chain where we have farms around the nation, you can go back to using wagon and horseback like we do here. I don't think living nomadically would have any roots in America. But really, this is the only region that I feel comfortable in because it is actually free as opposed to bureaucratized. The Americans
Mhm.
have a horrible, horrible time. I don't know how to make money there. I don't know how to live there. I don't know how to breathe there. I can't figure it out. I don't know what to do. I don't know why we allow taxes. That's ridiculous. That's antithetical to our founders' will. Um,
Mhm.
and I tried to, like you, I used to work in New York on Madison Avenue for a while. I just couldn't figure out how to escape that. And I
Mhm.
wanted to go find the freest place in the world that doesn't have zoning laws. When I buy land, I'm not going to be told by the government what structure I can live in. If I want to build my own home, I'm building my own home to where I see fit. If I want to
Mhm.
roam around on frontier lands to get to the western part of the country solely on horseback, of which I will be doing this summer, I can just do that sort of thing. And I needed a place with no government oversight. And I also needed a place where individuals naturally practiced what I am talking about. What
Mhm.
is absolutely marvelous to me about the Central Asians is they all think in this radically ancient and free way. None of them who live in the provinces want to participate in modernity at
Mhm.
all. It's like this plague to them. And I was just I was hanging out with some eagle hunters last week, and my friends and I were talking, and they said to me, when those vaccines came out, we just assumed everyone was going to die, and we were so excited because if everyone dies, we get to go back to just being nomads, and we can
Mhm.
do that because we preserved the skills. And I said, that's exactly why I moved here. And they go,
Mhm.
isn't it great? We can just go back to that stuff. We don't have to participate in anything. And I said, well, that's so nice to have, to have friends like you, Kanai. Funny enough, the man I talk to often is my guide here. His name is Kanai, which means blood moon. So they're
Mhm.
so ancient, they still have these kind of, we would think of them as Native American, Indian names. So, Blood Moon is calling the eagles to ride over the ridge and ransack the neighbor's tribe, something like that. And I really
Mhm.
like this type of aesthetic. I like being immersed in this environment. I take after the founding stocks principles where, we have a tradition that the Americans have set where you are abandoning the homeland to pursue an extremist ideal, whatever that might be. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, this radical devotion to the revival of the American frontiers myth means I had to leave my country to go find other frontiers. I would be certainly happy to fight the good fight on the American continent. I just refuse to uh, lose my legal tax exemption from living overseas. I don't think taxes are ethical, so I just found a
Mhm.
way to legally be exempt from a majority of my taxes. I don't think zoning laws make farming conducive. I couldn't go back to the continent alone just off of that. And I do think, even the Amish being my ideal sort of people, they might be regulated out of existence one day. The government could come in at any time and say, we refuse to allow you the religious exemption, to remove yourself from the 15% self-employment tax, and we remove the exemption to allow you to avoid vaccines, and we're just going to conscript you to do whatever. I think the power that the Americans has given the government in exchange for the illusion of comfort throughout the 1900s essentially completely destroyed our nation, where we were all rugged frontiersmen, rugged, wonderful frontiersmen, a majority of us, until 1899. And then we said, you know, we're going to build these things called suburbs now. We're going to build these things called cities. And our frontiersmen, you know, fuck those guys. We're going to bring in immigrants. We're going to bring in immigrants from Europe now. And these Europeans are going to come in and they're going to tell you how to live. And how you're going to live is in the cities that they're going to build. And they build the cities, and the frontier people say, well, you know, I would really like some more sugar. You know, we have our own self-productive supply routes and we've got our own little village communities, but I would really like some more luxury goods. That sounds kind of nice. What if I sold my farm to live over in the suburbs and cities? And you do that, living in a suburb or in a city for 1, 2, 3 generations, boom, your culture's gone. You have nothing now. You have no skills. Oh my God, wait a minute. I don't know how to plant seed in the ground and water it and make it bloom and blossom. I don't know how to ride horses anymore. Of course. Okay, fine. I'll get a car. Well, my car is expensive. I can take out a loan from the government. Now I'm a debt slave. And now as a debt slave, I have to go and commute on the train to New York every day, a foreign city away from my family. I used to commute from Long Island primarily every day, 2 hours a day to get to my workplace at the time throughout my college years. And then you soon begin to have a different mentality, that is different from I'm going to farm my own food and live self-sufficient and hunt my own food. Now, I don't even know how to hunt. I have to go to the grocery store. And I'm so useless, as a matter of fact. I need to have someone else. I need to make someone else money so I can make a percentage as a worker. These ideas are preposterous to me, and I refuse to live them. So those are some general thoughts. If you don't interrupt me, I'm afraid I'll trail on into the distance forever like my nomad friends. Terribly sorry.
No, it's great. Like I said, I think, you know, a big part of what I was hoping to get out, in especially in the first part of this podcast, was just kind of let you lay out your philosophy, because it is very unique, right? And again, I think that there's areas where we vehemently agree, and then there's kind of approach and strategy where we differ. And, you know, for me, that's not a big concern, right? My goal here is not to be like, oh, well, you know, here's my idea and this is why it's better than yours, and you should.
Did you know that you're not
right?
supposed to be Mongolian? Did you know that? Yeah, I did, actually. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Well, and for me, again, I think, and I mentioned this before we started the cast, is I believe very much in a diversity of strategy, like a biodiversity of strategy. And you kind of have like in a healthy ecosystem, right? You need, you know, you need your predators, you need your prey, you need, you know, different adaptations, because, you know, if there's any large scale change in the environment, you know, that biodiversity is what's going to allow, you know, something to continue on, right? Because it's going to be able to adapt better to the new environment. Some parts are going to die off, other parts are going to fill those gaps. And so I think that's largely what's happened with technology. And to your point, the advent of cities and the suburbs and this kind of movement of culture is, you know, and especially we're going through a much more rapid change than, you know, previous generations have, right? This is something that kind of strikes me when I think about the past of, you know, people grew up, you know, say farming, right? And, you know, your father farmed, and so you knew you were going to farm, and you knew your, you know, progeny was going to farm as well. And you weren't really concerned with changing that, or, you know, you didn't have to spend all this time at the beginning of your life like we do as a, you know, modern Americans, thinking about what career am I going to go into and what exactly, you know, do I want for my life? And, you know, because it was all kind of there for you. And people might think, oh, well, that's horrible. You were forced into seeing the world in a certain way, or you know, you could never move your station. And, you know, we value that so much as Americans, or at least in the modern American cultural ethos. But I think there's something to be said for being able to have certain parts of your life locked in and established, and then being able to focus on those kind of other elements, right? Because if you're no longer like constantly concerned with, you know, am I in the right career, or am I following the right path, or am I, you know, optimizing this kind of like meme of GDP go up, right? Like we're constantly kind of thinking about life through that frame on both a national level, but also on an individual level, right? It's like, how much money can I make and how successful can I be, is usually a big kind of motivating factor. But, if you're constantly preoccupied with these things, you don't really have the same appreciation for things like, just having like a get together or like a barbecue with friends, right? And that doesn't have to be something in the modern sense of, firing up the gas grill and, buying a bunch of store bought, beef patties or whatever, right? Like there's something transcendent about sharing a meal, right? Especially if you can do it outside, in nature, that kind of thing. And we just don't have, because we're constantly preoccupied with the immediate, with this optimization, we've kind of lost sight of the transcendent, right? The value of, thinking about your lineage, your ancestry, thinking about, the spiritual element of, reality and of God, and like just being a little bit more in the moment and relaxed and, not constantly worrying about the future. I think it's something that we don't realize that we've lost. And so, I guess where I'm going with this is I think that there's many ways that we can reclaim this. But the important thing is we need to know that, what is it that we're trying to reclaim, and what are the strategies that we can get there. And this is why I'm such a big proponent of culture and community and family and natalism and spirituality, is because I think, to your point, kind of this focus that you have, the way you characterize what is bad about modern society, I think it largely comes down to the materialism of, modern American society. And that's not to say in like kind of the cliche like consumerism way, although that's an element of it. I think that there's a lot of different ways that materialism manifests itself that we aren't aware of. And so it's really, really hard to reclaim that if we don't have that understanding. And I think that's largely what you're getting at here, is you're trying to, figure out what typifies that culture, that past, and, that nomadic life, and that, pioneer spirit, and, how do we recapture that? And I think the area that I'd want to get into, and kind of curious to hear your thoughts on, is, my approach has always been, hey, look, like we kind of have to ride the tiger of technology. You're always going to have this issue. I remember reading a book, man, what was it called? It was like the mechanism of freedom, or something like that. But it was basically talking about how you might be able to replace a lot of the systems with some sort of like legal system, or I kind of thought about this from the insurance standpoint, is like, okay, what if we didn't have any laws or rules, but people just, to whatever degree they wanted safety in a certain thing, they would buy into certain like, insurance or community or something like that, right? And so you have this opportunity to kind of experiment with those different things, those different levels of like safety and risk. um Kind of like a libertarianism kind of idea. But the question always comes back to this idea of like, okay, well, what if some nation state, raises an army and goes and, tries to take you over or something like that? Like, what happens in that scenario? And I think, that's a difficult problem to solve if you're a bunch of kind of like individual homesteaders. And so that's why kind of the question of like the importance of riding technology and being involved always seemed kind of important to me. I don't feel like the path that I want to follow is shying away from technology, but it is understanding how much technology can negatively impact and shape us. And that was a big part of the impetus behind writing Refuting Transhumanism. It wasn't so much to say, I have the absolute correct answer and here's what it is. It was more of like trying to articulate the problems with adopting synthetic process over natural process. And I think I'll kind of wrap on this point. The core problem that I saw is that natural process inherently considers all of the different things that we as humans, when we're looking at something, might miss, right? There's all of these invisible components. A very simple example of this is you're building a dam on a river, and for energy or whatever it is, And if you might build the dam well, and it might supply the the town that you need with energy or something like that, but maybe you didn't pay attention to how that dam was going to affect the ecosystem, and you end up killing off a bunch of the local fish or something like that, which has downstream effects of disrupting the occupation of the fishermen in the area, or whatever it is, right? And so there's these invisible systems that if you're not consciously aware of, you can screw up if you're not careful creating these synthetic systems. And I think that idea is broadly applicable to everything that we're dealing with, culture especially, is we are effectively creating synthetic culture. We're moving away from this natural culture, and if we're going to recapture those natural things, which are inherently superior, we have to figure out what was lost, what was missing, how to recreate that. And that's far more difficult, because you have to be consciously aware of all the different invisible systems, all the different ways that culture was healthy when you're trying to recreate that. So I think, guys, what I'm getting at here is that to me, it's very difficult for us to recapture everything, but the path back to that is understanding what was superior, what was healthy about the natural way of doing these things, and how can we recapture that to the the degree that we can, while kind of balancing the innovation of modern technology, and not losing the competitive edge. And maybe that's not as much of a concern for you, as kind of just like living a good life, but anyway, so some ideas to kind of chew on. I'd be curious to hear
All
what
right.
your thoughts are on that.
So now, general note, I have to build this myself because no one knows what I'm talking about. Period.
Mhm.
Simple as that. When I say technology, I'm not referring to physical technology. I am referring to a will of technology as an enemy. This is a
Mhm.
very important distinction. You have a physical technology that you can build and manipulate. And beyond that, you have the will of technology. The will of technology, call it progress, is something that demands the expansion of the physical technology. It is a will that drives the propulsion of technology to increase and expand forever and always. And this concept that we need to understand comes from a thinker named Jacques Ellul. He is the person who motivated Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski only summarized the ideas of Jacques Ellul. None of his philosophy and his manifestos was his. It was just from this one thinker named Jacques Ellul.
Mhm.
And Jacques Ellul is a French sociologist, and he was really confused after World War II. He was thinking a lot about, well, we have this modern world now, and we're trying to be Christian in a modern world, but what does that look like? And why are people maybe prevented from this sort of religious experience as they once were? And he says, in history, there was this great shift where we once had total control over the physical technology because of hierarchy, because of tradition. We had, in my view, ascetic warrior cultures of practices that were anti-material as our highest axiom. And then the French Revolution destroyed the hierarchy and mixed the castes together. And this was the dam that was preventing physical technology from taking a spiritual, metaphysical force and developing its own will. And now technology has divorced itself from the material and, in Jacques Ellul's words, become autonomous. And this type of autonomy can be found in many things, from legal systems are a type of technology. Social organization becomes a type of technology. He has hundreds of different definitions of technology, which are very complicated. But what he essentially says is, now that we don't have hierarchy, we are now at sacrificing our unique expressions of culture to build a space for technological expansion. And when we think about the word that you use, synthetic, what is synthetic? All of our goals, all of our motivations and our interests become synthetic, to which we feel as though we are moving in our own way. But all of our vision of the world and all of our alignments are surrogate activities. We feel we're getting power, but really we're stepping backwards. We're losing power. We're giving it to progress. And as a result, the system itself gets stronger and we get weaker. We only believe that we are stronger because we have access to more comfort. Materialism is one unique facet of the enemy, where it is our materialism that motivated us to leave from the frontier to these suburban hellscapes, to these urbanized hellscapes, and the sacrifices that have come in with that sacrifice, that we want material comforts, we want mass-produced good. That has been something that plagues every single nation. And I first experienced this loss in Vietnam, but I think it's very important for the American to know what this looks like when you are giving up something for progress. And this is a specific example from my Kyrgyz Kazakh friends. What are we talking about when we think about a modern system? What are its effects? Because the American is too comfortable. He doesn't realize what has happened to him. The 1800s, the start of the 1800s, people are nomadic. The late 1800s, the Russians come in, the Imperial Russians, and they start going to war with the nomads essentially because they want them to be a part of the Russian Empire. They want to conscript them for a war. 1916, there's a big genocide where the Russians and Kyrgyz are fighting. The Kyrgyz are running away. They're going to China. In the area now that would be relatively defined in the west of China, where the Uyghurs live. That's where a lot of Kyrgyz tried to flee to, and millions died. And then if you weren't killed and you still lived in the country, you were conscripted by the Soviets. And this means that you don't know how to be nomadic anymore because your dad was killed and your grandpa was killed, and now you're in a collective farm. Okay, well, we're learning farming. We're learning industrialization. And we don't have any resources to do farming, so we actually have to ship in camels to plow the original fields here, which is a very interesting sight to behold. And you're on your camel and you're plowing a field and you're a camel plower now. That's your job. That's your life. And you're becoming industrialized. Once the fields are plowed, now you're using Soviet machinery. Okay, great. I'm using Soviet machinery. I'm teaching my kid how to use Soviet machinery. And we live in a technological society. Now, that technological society is a completely new type of person because he no longer has connection to his nomadic roots. He doesn't have a yurt anymore. The eagle hunters, in particular, they were all killed or eagle hunting was banned. Only one of them actually survived with their traditions. A lot of the nomads completely were exterminated. You've got to rely on technology. Now, you do that for 1, 2, 3 generations. We're done. We don't remember a single thing about our unique cultural identity. We're Soviets now. But wait a minute. It's 1991. I think the Soviet Union just fell. Oh my God, I don't have electricity. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. We don't have food again. What can I do? Can you start the tractor? I can't start the tractor. We don't have gasoline. Oh my God. So what happened was the Turkish and Iranians came in and they give them local investment and now they can function again. Hooray. But basically, within 3 generations of communism, every ancestral skill removed, gone. They don't know what to do anymore. They can't live nomadically. Even the nomads today, the ones that did survive the Soviet Union as nomads, barely survived, and they now only practice semi-nomadism. They don't remember how to live fully independently. They still need to be complicit in the system. So what the system does is it wipes away your traditional uniqueness. It wipes away connection with ancestral homelands. It forces you into a confined area where you are over socialized and mixed with a variety of different cultures. And once your identity is completely removed, now the only option you have is to serve the system. And thus your choices become synthetic, where my choice is an illusion of a choice. The choices are manufactured for me. At the supermarket, all the food is GMO, you stupid idiot. Of course you wouldn't eat poison. You even know that you're eating poison now, but you do that because you don't have other choices. Now, as an American, you can go into the forests of Connecticut and you can hunt your own food, but you would never do that anymore because it's not a part of your culture anymore. And you also don't remember the skill to do that, or you haven't had a family member to do that. So you're disincentivized. All of your incentives and motivations, Jacques Ellul wants to say, and Kaczynski later parrots, are just surrogate activities. These are little illusions that make us feel more comfortable. You have this parasitic mind virus of progress that is in the background, manipulating every decision from the clothing that you wear to the actions that you take. And because you feel so comfortable in this technological society, the poison food feels so nice. I love to indulge on chocolate bars. It feels so good. And I can drive this vehicle that I've purchased by taking out a loan. And my money, I don't need to worry about money. I'll just take out loans forever from the government. It's irrelevant. Currency, as you probably know from someone who used to work in New York, currency is very different. The original form of currency, stock, comes from livestock, animals. Animals used to be the currency. When I go into the mountains, these nomads, you think of them as poor. You say, you can't just abandon technology. This is ridiculous. Are you saying all my options are surrogate activities? I'm rich. I don't care. These nomadic people you live with, they're poor. They're dirt. If I was a frontiersman now living on the farm, I would be in the middle of nowhere and no one would ever love me. And I say, go look at the nomads. There are families who survived in the Soviet times. There are very, very few who were able to survive relatively in the frontier regions and maintain some semblance of nomadic traditions. I've met them myself. I know they're real. And these people, once they survived the Soviet Union and the collapse began, what happened? These people, with their traditions, they made it. They were able to overcome the 1990s. Why? They still had animals. Not only did they have animals, they remembered how to use them. One man had eagles from this one man who lived in the frontier, ran around the country, running away from the Soviets all of his life. He kept his eagle. And now they can revive the tradition of eagle hunting. Those men that lived in the Western province that I was hanging out with in Toktogul, they survived by living in the most rugged province you could possibly imagine. I had 3 avalanches that I had to personally go through to bloody get to this region. It was terrible last month. I fell off my horse. I almost broke my back. Ugh. But there are people that lived in the frontier so well, they remembered and they kept their animals and they bred their animals. And there are nomads who don't use anything, but they have thousands and thousands and thousands of animals in the mountains still. You'll never see them. You'll never hear about them. The city folk don't even know they're there, but they are. And I've met them. So what happens is we have a question. How do I master technology? It's by maintaining, 1, an ascetic warrior culture. 2, technology is ancestrally transmitted. The technology that we need to most maximize is the skills that we've maintained with our culture to master the environment. Now, the steppe nomads need very little, which is why they were able to maintain their traditions so well. Make a yurt, make it out of animal bones, cover it in wool, you're good. That's what you need. That's all right. We've got people who are very wealthy. They can come down to the mountains whenever they like. You know, what is a sheep? A couple hundred US dollars, even in the current marketplace, like $300. People have got thousands of sheep. They've got maybe a couple dozen workers. They're fine. They can come back down. They choose not to. They choose to continue their lifestyle. It's rugged. It's difficult, but it's something that is uniquely meaningful to them. They have actual meaning. They don't just live in a city and their meaning is an Excel spreadsheet. Their meaning comes from the work they do, the toil they do. Don't think of toil as something evil or like a punishment. It may be horribly difficult, but what is the alternative? We're sitting in an artificial environment with artificial lights being projected on us. They're not incandescent bulbs, they're LEDs blinking at us all day. Our food is poison. You really think this is something to be promoted? I think not. I think going back and we have this meaningless crisis today because it's induced. We have no identity whatsoever other than is produced by a technological system. Of course, you feel meaningless. You're supposed to, because the result of feeling meaningless is you cling to anything that is presented to you. The boys of our nation are all man children. They are possessed by this horrible temperament where they are clinging to nostalgia. They are clinging to plastic comforts that are mass produced. They don't have an identity. The Revolutionary War in America, we had a battalion of 14-year-olds that one time stole a ship from the British and slaughtered every single one of them and retook back their little village. You know, we had these incredible men who have just been bred to be the most pathetic losers who can't even go up and talk to a woman. And online, they have the audacity to claim, oh, I can't talk to women. I'm a sensitive young man. Or I'm an autist. Oh, heaven forbid. I have vaccine damage. That becomes my identity now. We have entirely degenerated. And I would claim it. Sorry, I think my... Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I can still hear you.
Lost my stuff. My apologies.
No, you're all good.
Whoa. No, I disconnected my mic. 1 second. Technical error. Okay. Audio recording back online. Sorry. And we have these boys, and they just cling to nostalgia. They don't have any identity whatsoever, other than making an identity out of their own weakness. We have an entire race of people who conquered a nation, and they sit at home. They play manufactured adventure scenarios again and again in their video games. They live the traditions synthetically through a game so that they feel some semblance of purpose. And then they eat their poison food, and they're shorter, they're less strong, they're everything that's wrong with the world. They could never be a rower in their illustrious Connecticut University. They could never have the audacity to pick up and go out on an adventure. They always are stunted in their growth. And that's exactly what happens. You become the Soviet man, completely devoid of any identity, living only for the regime. But your regime isn't a person, it isn't a president, it isn't anything other than this force of technology in itself, this semblance of progress. Now, we could master technology, but the reality is that it is our master. We serve it in everything we do. We can't even be Christians anymore. We can't be Muslim, if that's your thing. We can't certainly be pagans. We can't even be Christian. You have to believe everything in that Bible is written and true. You open Genesis, it says that we live under a firmament. You can't believe in the firmament. You have to believe in space. It doesn't matter if space is real or fake or what you think of the earth is flat. It matters that, well, it says in the Bible, Jesus rose from the dead. You can't believe that. It's not scientifically valid. It says in the Bible that we live under a firmament and going into space is impossible. You can't believe that. It's not scientifically valid. You always overlay every view that you have in every facet of your life with progress first. That is the issue. And when you think about, am I going to get raided if I go back to a primitive lifestyle? Here, yes, we get raided all the bloody time, and I hate it. I dislike it horribly, where I have a friend who's a farmer, and he lives in one of his regions, and this idiot, this noble buffoon, is a foreigner like me, and he has a southern wife. Metaprime, could you imagine having a southern wife? I imagine you could. It's a horrible thing to do. You have a southern wife, and okay, it's fine that you have a southern wife. That's fine. I actually quite like southern people. I'm just joking. But God forbid he brought her to the north. Do you know what those northern people did to the southern woman? They burned his entire property to the ground because his wife was from the south and brought her to the north. He gets raided all the time. His apples in his orchard get picked, his goats get stolen, and he just decided to defect and leave up the country. Couldn't take it anymore. Do we get raided? Absolutely. But there are a select few people, as these nomads I have identified, that are far more wealthier than even I as a modern person, that have all the skills you can need, and they have the animals, and they have the skills to maintain their traditions, and they can do that. And they survived the Soviet Union. Now, there are not many. It is very difficult. It is like a horrible nightmare that I will have to live like that one day. And I'm very scared about it personally. I'm not saying this is some noble savage myth where the nomad is superior to the Western civilized man. I'm merely suggesting that it is possible. The Amish do it by moving down to Peru and Belize. The nomads have done it, surviving in their own nation, and it is possible for us to do it. This fear that we have of being raided and burned to the ground, I gave an example. It is true and it does happen, but it also is true equally that the Amish have the highest birth rates in America, that there are more of them than there are us. It is also true that the Amish have a very successful series of settlements all throughout the world. They even, the Russians even expelled some of the Mennonites here in the 1800s, and they lived relatively successfully. But it is the preservation of these type of lifestyles that I assert is not only more meaningful than any sort of modern commuter into New York to sell insurance life, as you and I both well know, than anything else. It is the preservation and the revival of these traditions. That is true power. True power is not working in a government political position in which all you're doing is weakening your populace by poisoning them in some way, shape, or form for the technological regime. Rather, any position of power will always be governed by this sort of progressive force. And we need to invent new ways of thinking. We talk about alternative strategies. Okay, fine. Maybe there's alternative strategies, but I have to build one that allows the philosophy of my side to shine. Who will speak for the American farmers? Oh, the online Twitter folk. You think having 300 acres of farmland in America makes you a loser? Well, you're unmarried, hiding behind an anonymous account, posting about a revolution that you yourself can't form. Okay, that's nice. Oh, the Appalachian and in Western Virginia, these people are degenerates and inbreds. We could never be a hillbilly like them. You're in debt. You're in debt for a car, you fucking retard. So I think we need to form a genuine school of thought, which is what I'm doing for these folk people, have a folk movement, to give the folk people a rallying cry of unification, to maintain some kind of vitalist ancient tradition of our people that stems far back in the 1700s as Americans, and maybe takes in some of our ancient Aryan temperamentalities that I've had to integrate with here on the steppe. So that's my whole shtick, if you will.
No, and I think that's great. I mean, at the very least, I think that I would be very disappointed to live in a world where these things didn't exist, right? If we were completely modernized across the board, if there was no, nomads or people in the steppe or any of that kind of stuff, I think the world would be significantly worse off for it. Not even for the simple reason of like, well, what if technology failed us? We would have nothing to fall back on, right? I think that what you're really kind of pointing out here is that there is, again, the natural systems are superior and that they have this deeper connection to who we are at a natural level. They kind of facilitate, to me, like, so for example, I think one of the purpose of life, right, is to learn about yourself and about creation through struggle. And by learning about creation, you learn about the creator, however you want to interpret that. And so for me, when I think of these kind of very physical, very tactile challenges of life, you're working the land, of getting to know people, of dealing with adversity, going out in nature, right? This is the most raw form of challenge that one can have, right? Whereas, the abstractions of the challenges that we deal with in a technological sense, they're very detached from nature. And so it's harder, right? Like you're looking through these, many layers, this, of like foggy glass to kind of, try to get at that picture. Whereas if you're kind of in the natural world, it's just immediately apparent, a lot easier to see. And so I think that there's a lot to be learned from that way of life, from those cultures, from those experiences, that it's a lot harder to pull, as as you're talking about, like a lot of these things, like playing video games or interacting in kind of a digital way is very it's synthetic, right? It's a simulacrum of the kind of these natural things. It's an imitation at best. And you might be able to kind of, if you think of a video game, kind of like press the dopamine buttons in the brain, but are you really, again, anytime I think of the creation of a synthetic process, I think of, well, it might be better across certain dimensions, and those are the dimensions that we're like aware of or highlighting or designing across. But the reason that the natural version is superior is there's all of these invisible dimensions, or these these dimensions that we're not giving enough consideration to, that we're missing out on. And so one could say that that's kind of the case with a lot of these, the modern entertainment, from video games to social media and just videos and shows and TVs and movies and all that kind of stuff. So,
well, you have to think about this idea of entertainment. The only reason that we're able to stomach living in an office for 50 years before retirement is because we're provided entertainment on a scale that is unimaginable. Now, you can think it's wonderfully nifty to get Netflix incepted into your brain with Neuralink, but I'm more curious as to why you would need that. Why does everyone have an addiction to social media? Okay, so some technology is addictive. Well, let's think of it not as an addiction, as a possession. Carl Jung had this idea of ideological possession, where a human consciousness can be overtaken by an ideal, and you can be possessed, as if by a type of ghost or spirit, to move in a direction. And I think that's exactly what technology does with us. It should be viewed as something ancient, a primordial possession by an external entity. And one who is possessed certainly doesn't know he's possessed, and he doesn't have a comprehension of his possession. Rather, he acts only in alignment with that idea which possesses him, and he seeks to bring it into life, and he sacrifices his life, aspects of himself, so that his identity can be further and further reduced, and the parasitic idea can have total hold into him. And that's the idea of transhumanism, where okay, 19 and this is a very long process, but again, 1800, hierarchy is destroyed, the will of progress is born. Chapter 1 and 2 of Jacques Ellul's Technological Society, to explore that idea and the validity of it. Now, in the 1900s, the family unit's destroyed, ancestral home, ancestral connection with land is destroyed, ancestral skills are destroyed. We are forcibly mixed in cities. 2000s, 2010, 2020, we are forcibly mixed with a variety of different invading populations all throughout the world, and our technology begins to have a collective consciousness to it. All of that, by the way, is actually transhumanism. It's not only just humans merging with machines. First, you have to divorce the human from his identity. Then, once he is purified from the identity, through in the 2020s, we have the forced mixing of all the cultures together. Now that he's removed from his lands, he has no choice but to accept the illegal invader. Now that he has no identity as a frontiersman or a rugged individual who can live self-sufficient, he has to fully serve the system. He can't actually rebel anymore. It'd be very easy for Americans to organize, go to a border, exhume them of forces. We did that for literally until I think 1910. California had bounty laws where you could kill Native Americans, bring a scalp to the government, and get paid for it. So that was very common. But we can't do that anymore because we lost the skill, we lost the culture that would allow us to do that, and we lost the individual agency. Now we're going to be forcibly mixed in a new way with all of the illegal folk, and our identity will universally become the same. Every international nation will become the same. You can see this primarily in Japan, where the birth rates are going to fall low. We are focused on praising the god of GDP, and under the guise of GDP, we bring in more foreigners. The foreigners legally are allowed to buy up all the land in a nation. The Japanese are going to fall to a very low percentage, and their island is going to be completely inhabited by foreigners. This will be the same thing that happens now currently in the UK. This will be the same thing that happens to America. And in the third world, by the way, they are also being, in their opinion, invaded by Indians and Pakistanis, having the same problem. Now, this is a global issue. This is not a Western issue. People would not be aware of this. The forced mixing is necessary. The person needs to be more and more divorced from his identity, his consciousness. He needs to be reduced where he no longer has any skills. Now he gets to use AI, which is another very extreme will. He uses the AI. He doesn't rely on his own rationale. He doesn't rely on his own imagination. Rather, actually, all of his opinions come from TikTok trends. That's a collective consciousness. That's already a force of transhumanism, where you refer not to your own loneliness and solitude to generate an idea, and not to refer to your own solitude to let the blood memories flow from your ancestors and let the idea take a unique shape within you. Now it's watered down by a collective. So we are at a stage where we are being ethnically cleansed globally by everyone through mixing, forced mixing from the system, by the design of the system, so that it can expand further. Once the individual consciousness is reduced, then you can have a merging with technology and the human. Now, this is technically, and this is where people get this wrong, it's technically good for you to increase your GDP. It's technically good for you to get a robotic eye or a robotic arm. That is good because it increases your productivity, but it is not good for, let's say, the purpose of meaning. Because the robotic man, of which will come with primarily through Neuralink first, every action that he has will be fully subservient to his new God. He isn't a person anymore. He doesn't have a connection with his blood or with his kin or with his skills. He's only a drone-like denizen. And the worst part is we venerate that type of man as the highest type of man we can go, because our definition of progress has become inverted due to materialism. We identify the pursuit of comfort and luxury, which are illusionary pursuits provided by the system, to be its highest value. But we all know we live for thousands of years where asceticism was our goal. And we pursue asceticism, as you said, to have a unification with our creator. And we have all these men, primarily on the internet, who say, no, I would live it as, and I swear to God, I hold my hand up high. I promise, I'm a Bronze Age man. Me, I would do that. If it was 2,000 years ago, I would be a Bronze Age man. I would do that. Okay, well, I don't see anybody here on the steppe working with nomadic populations. I don't see anybody taking over Haiti. If you're so noble and so barbaric, take over the nation of Haiti. You could do that, but you don't. You're engaged in another fanciful act where you are living in an illusory world of comfort. You are addicted to your comfort, and you can never go beyond it. You have no value of the ancient world where they use technology correctly. Technology was once manipulated by man through his ascetic choices, through his anti-materialism, and this created beauty. We have no beauty because, according to Jacques Ellul, beauty, aesthetics, is something that reduced technological progress. It took you a long time to make something beautiful. That developed from a guild, a craft. A generation after generation was focused on the production of something that was gorgeous. And these gorgeous things were often very lacking in production because you're not focusing on boosting the capability of something. You're boosted on looking at something as a human, and it doesn't matter. You're not a human anymore. You have no identity. Go get a MacBook. Go get a MacBook that's simple. Go build an apartment building that's the most simple, placid thing ever. I live in the Soviet world. Everything is brutalist architecture in its most simplest form. Why? Because once you are horribly removed from all of your meaning structures and identity, the only thing you have left is progress to serve. This is not a communist or a libertarian issue. This is a global issue where internationalism, progress, whatever you want to call it, that is the God that we serve. And as acolytes in the religion, all we do is venerate progress as an advancement rather than a decline, rather than a horror show, rather than the most horrific sense of imprisonment. So these are some things that I try my very best to fight against. But of course, I'm a prisoner as much as anyone else.
And I think that this is a very important point to illustrate. And I have a lot of appreciation for the way that you talk about this, right? Like, I don't know if you've run into the Warhammer 40K memes and or ever explored that, the kind of fictional universe that they depict there. But one of the big aspects of it is kind of these, how there's this immaterium, right? This ethereal realm in which you have the coalescence of these different like ideas into gods. And there's kind of like the four chaos gods. They're like the four aspects of kind of like vice. You have like war, plague, like pleasure and knowledge, depravity and knowledge and stuff like that. So but it's very much the same kind of concept of like possession by idea, like egregores kind of taking over. And so I think this point that you're making of progress being kind of this pseudo god, this egregore that's kind of taken possession of people, and again forces them to kind of see the world through that lens. I mean, this is something I talk about a decent amount, is how hyper individualistic America has become. And we don't, and I think like this is just a small example of like how far removed we are from these kind of healthy traditions in nature. Is like we used to pass down knowledge from generation to generation. Now we have this mindset that that the correct way for parents to raise their children is to send them off to school where they're going to go out and discover their passion, and they're going to figure out a whole new career path that's completely unique to what their parents did before them, and that's going to be fulfilling because they chose it themselves, and it resonated with them. Where the vast majority of the time that fantasy is a complete fabrication. People are just kind of figuring out how can I make money, especially in today's economy. They're like, look, like I don't really have the luxury of doing what I'm passionate about. I have to do the Excel spreadsheet job and pretend that it's fulfilling and interesting and engaging, even though I'm working with a bunch of strangers, and I'm working for a company that the second I'm no longer relevant to its bottom line GDP go up kind of agenda, then I'm going to get kicked to the curb. There's no loyalty there. And the point that I'm getting at here is there's no ownership from family to family. There's no sense of tribe or community. I mean, this is something that even I have difficulty instilling in my own family. Is I make a point of spending time with aunts, uncles, my parents, my cousins, those kinds of things, and trying to say, hey, look, let's have more family get-togethers. Let's spend more time together. Let's value this. Maybe let's collaborate on business projects or stuff like that. And it's an extreme uphill battle, and that's very frustrating because you would think that people would be excited about the opportunity that conveys. And I'll kind of wrap it up on this thought of like meaning, right? That's really what this is we are trying to have a meaningful experience. And to your point, if all you do is worship at the altar of progress, of material consumption, it's you're kind of chasing this abstract goal that is very much not unique to yourself, not unique to who you were, to how your ancestors were before you, right? The nation, the family, the community, all of these kinds of things are lost in these synthetic environments. And I think if we are to rediscover what is meaningful, it is going to be found in the past but it also needs to contend with the future that we're in, right? And that's a big thing for me is, and I think like the area that we diverge the most on our philosophy is, do we go back to, as you kind of say, this kind of Ludditism, and in these nomadic cultures, or do we try to build something that appreciates kind of what you're trying to recapture there, but also kind of exists in this technological world, and can you do that without kind of handing your soul over to technology and to progress? I mean, I think it's a difficult thing, and it's almost easier to, it's not easier, but it's much more of a certain thing that you're going to find meaning in the traditional ways, in the more natural ways, than trying to recreate those in like a synthetic way. But I think the question becomes, well, if you're if you don't try to engage with the modern environment, if you don't try to kind of take advantage of technology, and kind of synergize it with these kind of transcendent, meaningful things, like, because I feel like that, it's going to be impossible to convince everyone to just revert to kind of a frontier philosophy. The question becomes, how can you give people like a path to appreciating those things without fully giving up technology, or is that even viable, or is that even something that you'd want people to think is possible? I don't know. I'm kind of
Sure.
curious
Well,
to.
you've got the main idea here. All right.
Hmm.
Problems in America. We've got all these ideals. I speak about ideals all the time, primarily in myth. I speak in myth and stories because that's my job, quite literally. Speaking in myths and teaching stories to young adults. So when I'm speaking in myths, what is the actionable step to ground it in reality? Of course, the step number one is go, hey, my family. Oh my goodness, my family is entirely broken. We're scattered to the ends of the earth. I need allies in this world. I have some type of impoverished condition, and the economy is no longer existing, whereas exploding to some extent. I have no goods. I'm just a loser. What do I do? And the answer is you have to fall back to your family. First, we need to, in the immediate, unify the family, reunify the family, and purchase land. Everybody is considered to be, they must be considered of value rather than sacrifice life to be the drone and the corporation. You need to make your own system entirely. This is the goal. So you take your family and you purchase land together and you order land. This is how we always lived. Think about the South. We have these wonderful plantation homes that would foster one or two generations of people. Going back to this type of life is incredibly valuable. We can see that the boomers, as they are called to, have no connection with their children. They sell homes in the pursuit of more material. The material ethos is the great divider of our once great clans, because if you're a materialist, you'll do something as my stepmother said. She chastised my father for paying millions of dollars in end of life care bills for his parents. And my stepmother wonderfully and most nobly said, I would have made my parents take out a loan to cover their cancer treatment. So that's the type of modern degenerate person that says, well, I can't care for my own family. I'm a
Hmm.
materialist. If they prevent me from making an extra $100 a day, I'll throw them under the bush. So, okay, first, let's get rid of the material thing. Let's say, okay, family is a value. Let's go find
Yep.
land. Where do we find land? West Virginia, upstate New York. Great. You've got your family, you've got your land. Now, is that idealistic? Absolutely. I'm sure you have some cousins you can call up that are unemployed and they have nothing going for them. You'll be fine. Every family every person in that family is a worker. They are working to produce something. What I would suggest is that everyone gets their own specialization. Same thing you do when you go off to school, you've got specializations. The women, of course, women are meant to be God's atmosphere models. They stay at home, they manage the families, they prepare the food. Of course, we all have a trad wife. These things are the natural states of women. Just don't make them work. It's not hard. Women love not working and staying home all day and wearing cute dresses. That's their favorite way to live. Great, give it to them. Fine. They're not going to leave as long as you provide them the basic amenities. And every woman loves a traditionalist extremist. That's just the thing they're most attracted to, of course, as we all know. So, you got your traditional extremist philosophy. It unifies people around you. People become workers. In my group, for example, my Luddite maximalist friend was the investor. We had another gentleman who was a very skilled carpenter. He was a wonderful maker of homes. So great. We had a guy that made homes. We had another guy that invests. I'm a teacher. So I would be able to work in the local environment to make connections and do negotiations. And I would be able to, let's say, facilitate trade between our group. We have a manual labor specialist. He can build your family a home, and your family in exchange can barter and trade with us some goods. Now, bartering and trading, that's a fun thing to do. Let's say if people actually live the philosophy, bartering and trade, do we get taxes on bartering and trading? Interesting. What kind of exemptions would we get? Interesting. What if we lived in a very low sense? Do we get taxed if we don't make any money? Is there a way we can go beyond the economic system? Now, I'm not capable of answering that question, partially because I'm too stupid, but could there be an alternative source of economic structure we could use, which again, very similarly to the Amish, focuses on labor as a product? Everyone always toots on Twitter now because it's so cool. Oh, the Nazis! I'm an alt-right person. I have to be rebranding fascism. Fascism is about labor, you stupid fuck. Fascism focused on the philosophy of labor. We're getting out of debt by building again. Now, you can't just sit here and type on Twitter about, oh, it's a plague it is to work. I could never lift my delicate fingers. I must go bodybuild at the gym and become beautiful. I could never build a chicken coop. God forbid it's slave work. Slaves, we'll get slaves to do it. We'll conquer Haiti and bring the blacks. And, this is ridiculous. So, we go back to focusing on labor. We get our family unit, and we can barter and trade with other clans. Now, of course, that's not going to happen because no one barters and trades and no one has skills, but it would have to be something like that, where you've got your settlement, you've got your people, they're cemented in a position, and for multiple generations, and this is a generational thing, you can't do this in one generation. Our generation starts out, we buy the land. We build those basic structures. Our children expand the structures. They take the livestock, they grow them into a vast herd. Now your children have animals. Your grandchildren have enough animals where they can sell to other people and make an economy. These things are not difficult to ascertain. It is literally what we have always done. It is not a revolution in itself. It is just saying, what did my great-great-grandfather do? He had a farm. Well, how did he get that farm? Well, someone had to conquer the land. Someone had to build the system. Then that system, when other people were brought over, they traded their skills. Oh, actually, my great-grandfather, he was a carpenter. Oh, my great-grandfather was actually a blacksmith. Oh, my great-great-grandfather worked on the canal. They exchanged goods and services. We didn't tax that. You don't tax that. You just trade a good in your local environment. World War II, a great example of being productive. How did we win the war? Every single village community at home was growing vegetables that they would send to the front lines to the Americans or the Soviets. Just make stuff. It's not complicated. Now, what type of people would do that? I personally don't like vaccinated people. I don't want to touch them. I will not live in a country with them. I don't like poison in my bloodline. So I particularly advocate this philosophy to the 10% of people globally who remain pure-blooded. My supposition and the supposition of the nomads that I live with, and really every traditional population that includes the Vietnamese tribal folk that I know that avoided vaccination, all the vaccinated folk are going to die. That's our belief. We're prepping for the total destruction of civilization, and we need to hedge against that.
Real quick, I'm kind of curious to explore this a little bit because, I did avoid getting it myself, but, I have family who got it, and, I know a lot of people who got it. And so, and I, back when this happened, there was a part of me that was kind of like, this is going to be really bad. And I think I haven't paid too much attention to it that recently, but I have heard, things about, it passing on and, that not being good and all this kind of stuff. But so it seems like this is, you brought it up a few times. I'd be kind of curious to get your take on like kind of the deeper reasons behind why you believe those things.
So back in 2020, I lived, no, not 2020. When the hell was it? Oh, I don't know. 2019, 2020. I was riding my motorcycle down the streets of Saigon in Vietnam, just doing some paperwork for the government, renewing my documents or something. And I got a call while I was on my motorcycle. And one of my friends said, you know what a vaccine passport is? I said, no. And he said, well, pull over and sit down. So he explained to me the U.S. government, the three that we had on file were the U.S. government, the Mexican government, the Taiwanese government, all uploaded these things called vaccine passports. This is prior to the pandemic. And they said there's we're going to start using vaccine passports and mandating vaccines to travel and go around the world. And here's yours, and you can print it out. I said, what the fuck is that about? And he said, I don't know. We should probably pay attention to that and keep it on file. I said, okay. And briefly in the same time, I was living on the Chinese border in 2019 and 2020. And I got horribly injured because a dog jumped out in front of my motorcycle in the middle of the jungle. And this was at like 11 o'clock at night. And I had to go drive 21 kilometers to the nearest hospital. It was all bandaged up. I maybe had a slight concussion. And I wake up in the morning and I go eat pho. And I'm watching people walk over the border of China in Laogai. And at the same time, when I'm eating my pho, I actually see a friend of mine from my old province. He is hospitalized on the news. He was from Japan. Strange vegan fellow, doesn't matter. So I was watching news because I saw him. I was like, well, that's weird. And then the next segment was all of these Chinese videos of people walking like zombies, projectile vomiting blood, and passing out in the street.
Right.
And I thought that was a very weird connection there. And I couldn't figure out what that meant. Now, of course, I'm 23. I'm riding motorcycles and wearing leather jackets and living with tribal people. I don't care about these civilized people with their diseases, whatever. If they want to be a diseased person, that's their choice. But thinking, okay, we've got this weird disease thing spreading. We've got these vaccine passports that are uploaded to government website portals prior to this pandemic. We've got battleships coming into New York City with 0 people on it, but we've got battleships there. Just to let you know, there's a health ship in the harbor. You can go. No one was actually treated in these ships, but the aesthetics start to come out. The Vietnamese. We have this very funny joke in Vietnam where if you go into the north and you ask, well, how was the war? And they say, oh my God, the Americans, they loved the war. And I say, the Americans loved the war. I say, of course, they called our capital Hanoi and the prison that we kept them in the Hanoi Hilton. The Hilton is the best hotel chain in the world. Of course, we have the best prisons for our POWs. It's wonderful for them. We're going to refurbish these prisons all throughout the nation, and we're going to put in anyone who allegedly may have this disease by forcible conscription. So they're opening up prison camps everywhere. I'm seeing battleships come into the harbor of New York. I've got intel before everything went down about vaccines being mandated from everyone. My friends and I, we sit down, we do all the research. We say, okay, what is a vaccine? The history of vaccines produced for eugenic purposes. We're coming out with vaccinations to control and select for certain eugenic qualities. We're targeting certain populations to make sure they breed and don't breed. Great, wonderful. Go into any library and you'll find that to be true, which I did with my own university on paper myself, which was funny. And then if you look into research from the 2010s, you find that vaccines have a new type of function. If you use them in exotic animals, for example, you can actually vaccinate one endangered species, capture it, vaccinate it, and the vaccine will shed through its fluids. That was in about 2016. So, we have a vaccine that was told, was immediately invented in 2020 in like a couple of days by some guys, just randomly, and we're going to Operation Warp Speed that into production. Thank you, Trump. This vaccine is totally unrelated to all the other vaccine trials we did with vaccine shedding the particle into endangered animals. We would never use that on a human population. And I just found it strange that I was alerted to the pandemic prior to it happening. I was on the Chinese border the day that it was reported originally in Wuhan in Yunnan province, which I could see with my eyes over the water. And I found it weird that every country in the world was doing the same protocol. When in human history have the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, and even North Korea had the same policy? The answer to that is once, which would be the Antarctic Treaty, which is another rabbit hole to go down. Only one time in human history with the Antarctic Treaty is everybody involved, the communists, the every single person was holding hands in the world. Okay. But the Vietnamese killed everybody by living in holes. Why would they accept this from the government? The Americans are the most powerful people. Why would everyone roll over and take this thing? And the American government, we had a VAERS reporting site for vaccine injuries, and it came out, and you could read it. And it had several thousand vaccine adverse injuries listed in January when they began the database. Now, why is that database important? it was very clear that it represented 1% of the estimated injuries and deaths. So
Yep.
you had, I think the first month was 1,825 injuries reported. That's 1% of what they estimated. They told you the entire time that it was going to kill you. And before it happened, that it was coming. And before even that, in 2010, you had a document called Operation Lockstep that detailed all of this. This was the most obvious genocide in human history. And everyone was happy to hold hands and to destroy their bloodline, which, by the way, the vaccine, as we know, as was proven again in 2020 in the first months, disseminates through a woman's breast milk, which means it continues on through the next line. I will not be subjected to settling myself with these poison folk in their poison nations playing their poison games. I'll invent my own system. I will go to the edges of the earth and I will work with only unvaccinated populations, and I will not be tainted by this sort of illness. You do with that information whatever it is that you people want to do. I don't care. What I care about is my own self-preservation, and I think the 10% of survivors need to rally behind an agrarian movement where they can be completely self-reliant so that no longer do they need any participation in that world. So you guys fight over scraps. I'll be out here.
No. I mean, I appreciate you kind of taking the time to go through that. I guess, like, and don't get me wrong, right? Like, I think generally my philosophy when it comes to a lot of these kind of questions is that it's hard for me to tell, like, I'm no authority. I don't take the time to dive into the details here. I feel pretty happy in my stance of like, hey, I'm just not going to ever get it. And, I was happy I didn't get it. But at the same time, it's hard for me to know, like, when people to take pretty, assertive stances on stuff like this. I'm always kind of curious as to kind of hearing their rationale, because I think one of the things that kind of sticks out to me against them like poisoning people with this, and don't get me wrong, I think to some degree, it can be, at the very least, it can be easily explained with like greed, right? Where they were like, oh, this is the solution, and we're going to be able to sell like tons and tons of these, vaccinations to people, that kind of stuff. But I think there was a lot of people who aggressively drink the Kool-Aid on everything that the regime, and the mainstream delusion puts out. And so, like, why would you kind of like poison those people when, when they're such good little, followers for you? Whereas, like everyone who would kind of reject getting it, right? If those are the people who make it through the other side, like, aren't you just kind of like culling your own followers, right? Like, I'm just kind of curious your take on that.
Of course. Well, that's always what technology does. Play a
Hmm.
video game. What does that do? It culls your followers' skill. You don't develop skill in real
Sure.
life. You can't save your family. You have nothing. You've lost your time. Ha, you lose. Take vaccinations. Why does the technological system mandate vaccines? By the point of making it illegal not to accept them. We must
Hmm.
be poisoned so that we are weak. When we are weak, we rely further on the system and we cannot escape. So we are drugged into a state of mandated futility. And it is this futility that is a horror and a plague on every nation, where again, you are provided an illusion of safety that poisons you so that you do not escape from the controlled network. That is a very, very important point to me personally. And I think every
Hmm.
father specifically needs to take very seriously the preservation of his blood. Now, I talk a lot of my, I use a lot of ancient vernacular to speak. We talk about the purity of the blood. What I mean about the
Hmm.
purity of the blood is I mean people who have untainted blood from vaccines, literally. I think these people are the only people that I'm personally talking to. I think
Hmm.
anybody that has participated in this has advanced their acceptance of the techno transhumanism state, where you have taken the I mean, you're literally taking graphene in you, but you're merging again with technology. You're saying the will of technology is so powerful that it can save me from death itself. That's the mythos that you're possessed by. I will
Hmm.
become so powerful that not even disease can touch me. And then I will become an alt-right health influencer that lives in a pod, and I will call this superior living, where I am completely removed from grass. I consume vitamins. I am the overman.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's very, I don't know. I think, like, to me, when it comes to the vaccine stuff, like, I'm kind of two minds. Like, one is like any rational person approaching that should have had some questions at the very least, but also at the same time, I don't know how much my you know past history you've kind of bumped into, but I started as an East Coast liberal, growing up. My family listened to like NPR and all that kind of stuff, and so I had to speed run from like 2016, Bernie bro, all the way to kind of figuring it all out. That was it was part of the reason that I do what I do, is because that was a difficult path to navigate, of like what is true, what is not true, what's actually valuable to orient towards, what are viable solutions. Like, I think a big part of this too is that if you are to become disillusioned with the mainstream and kind of what they sell you in technology and progress, you have to be able to provide people with like a viable and healthy and kind of optimistic alternative, right? Because if you're talking to them about how their daily life is full with poisons and bad decisions and all that kind of stuff, which again, I generally agree with, right? Like, the question becomes, okay, well, what is the alternative? What do I orient myself towards? And so for me, when it comes to the vaccine stuff, like, I think there were people who like weren't quite in the know, or hadn't fully become disillusioned with the mainstream, and so weren't as skeptical as they needed to be in order for them to kind of resist that or push back. And they were just like, oh, I'm going to go along to get along. And and I see people who have kind of like come around on that, right? And it's sad that it took them that long to do that. But the question becomes like, you know what place is there for people who have true and earnest you know um they're truly sorry, and kind of like they have kind of a desire to kind of own that going forward, especially the people who like initially bought into like the whole like, oh, lock things down, and like the unvaccinated are, because I think that's the other aspect of this is the unvaccinated were meant to, were in the mainstream. They were, you remember that like the Biden thing put out where he was like the unvaccinated are going to experience a winter of death, and it's going to be horrible. And they were really villainized in the mainstream and kind of seen as like, oh, the reason that this is still going is because people refuse to get vaccinated. So it was a very interesting time. But I guess,
Well, I can tell you the most interesting thing about this phenomenon, and I wrote about this very, very extremist rhetoric in the use of this piece, but I had a title of a Substack post, very long, called When We Failed to Kill Them. I thought this was the worst day in modern history, which was March 24th of 2020. And this is the only reason why people believe in this particular vaccination, is because on this day, the legal definition of death was changed. You could legally, since that time, this is still in effect, anybody who is remotely suspected of dying from COVID is now legally able to be declared dead from COVID. So what you do is you allow doctors a little bit of a bonus to say, just this person died from a virus, just to suspect it. It's fine. Just suspect, the specific language, suspect. So, okay, great. So doctors can suspect everybody since March of 2020, March 24th of 2020, to be dead of COVID. You can change the entire fabric of the world forever. People can die from this for a century. There is no reason to go back and change how death certificates are counted. It's too stupid. You wouldn't think about it. It's too low. So we can just manufacture panic. We can manufacture you to consent. We can manufacture you to do whatever it is that the technological system requires. Now, I can tell you, and I can build a philosophy about what material motivations would bring about your submission to progress, and I can identify what progress is and how it works for you, and I can tell you how you're manufactured, but then you actually have to be the anti-materialist and say, I don't want to do that anymore, and walk away. Just like you had, I'm assuming, okay, we're selling insurance, we're in New York City, very clearly a very wealthy and affluent gentleman, as we know. If you're commuting on that train every day, as I once had from Long Island, but you're coming from Connecticut, I've lived that life too. I know those guys are very upright, upstanding, very good producers for the economy. And that's something that is certainly promoted, the ability to be so successful economically. But also you have to say, I think I can do something better with my time. I think I don't have to live this way anymore. I think I could just walk away. And that's my option. I'm saying, here's the philosophy of walking away. Here's what are the systems that are preventing you from walking away. Here are the material illusions, the maya, to use an Indo-Aryan term, the illusion that's keeping you in that system. And you can choose to live that way, and I'll be friends with you, and I'll communicate with you. And personally, I'm going to be removed from everything that you are and represent, and you can be removed from everything I represent. That's just fine. I see us all as these horrible prisoners in this sort of techno-industrial prison together. And anybody who wants a call for unification or to do something more, rather how idealistic I may appear, I am a man of action, and I'm certainly happy to take in any denizens I can to build this sort of folk movement.
Yeah, and I think that that's the advantage of being online, right? Like I've talked with people extensively about, what is the path, right? How do things get changed, right? Because I think that, again, I said this earlier, I don't think there's a top-down solution. I think it has to come from the bottom up. And so what does that look like? And, I do think that it is local community building, right? And there's different incarnations of that. I think what you are doing is a form of local community building. It's a little bit different than, the strategy I might use or other people might use, but it's the same kind of philosophy of like, look, you only have as much strength as you have in the real world. Like, numbers on a spreadsheet or, dollars in a bank account mean very little if, things get difficult and, start to break down. Right. And so, okay, we're building local communities, but how does the internet play into that? Right. And I think that this is an important point in my mind is, the potential for what the online offers is online fraternal networks, right? People who are kind of disillusioned with the mainstream. They're looking for, the correct answer, right? Or a better alternative. And so, we can come online, we can have these conversations, which I think is necessary because a lot of times people need the catharsis of realizing that, as they get disillusioned with the mainstream, that they're not crazy or they aren't seeing things or whatever, that, what they are frustrated with and concerned by are very legitimate things. And that there is a healthy alternative, because I think it is one of the things that I found when I was going through this back in 2016 was just how nihilistic you can get if you don't think that there's a viable alternative. If you think that like you're the only one breaking away from the system, and any attempt otherwise is going to be doomed to failure, right? I think it's very essential that you feel optimistic about the potential success of kind of these breakaway movements, these parallel systems, whatever you want to call them, right? And so that is the value that the online networks can provide, is some sort of fraternal network in which people can come, they can have conversations, philosophical conversations about what should be done next. And then the idea is to provide connections to real world situations in which people are building local community. And so, if people resonate with your project or resonate with other projects, right, like then they have those alternatives. They can funnel that energy into something that's real. And I think like this is the hard selling part. And I guess the kind of the last topic I want to throw your way as we look to wrap up here is, how do you get people on board, right? Because I think that there's a like a varying degree of interest and motivation, and you can find people who are very motivated, but even if you found people who are very motivated and driven, you'd still have to kind of prove to them the path that you're offering is viable, right? And so generating that initial momentum is a little bit difficult, especially considering a lot of what we are competing against, as you mentioned earlier, is this kind of like larpy power fantasy that is often peddled online by a lot of these neo dissidents, as I call them, these people who pretend that they are disillusioned with the system and fighting against it, when really they're just again getting you caught up in a different version of that technology. Because the problem is building at a local community level is very unglamorous compared to the power fantasy that's being offered online, right? It requires real world work. And then even if you're kind of bought into the philosophy and the ideology and you're willing to put in the work and you have the discipline, right? It can often be the case where, I've seen projects similar to this get started and have a lot of interest, but they fail because they brought in too many people too quickly, and not all those people were committed, and they ran into people who were slightly different, in their ideological bents, and so therefore they had friction, and things fell apart because there wasn't a trust that was built up yet, right? It was that transition from the digital to the real is difficult, and so I'd be curious to hear, kind of your approach to this. Obviously, you're online. Obviously, talk about your ideas digitally. Like, how, in kind of the ideal world, would you see this play out in kind of a practical sense?
Right. Well, my group had something similar with us, where my founding stock Americans just were all living in Armenia, and they go, I think it's too modern here. How the fuck can a forest in Armenia be modern for you people? What are you talking about? And they said, no, we got to move to the jungle. So, okay, I am not allowed to disclose where they are. Oh God, not like anybody can bloody get there. Jesus Christ.
Sure.
But, time goes by. I thought myself, well, you guys live in Armenia. I'll be in Kyrgyzstan, and I will work here and in Kazakhstan and all these places, and I'll bring money to you guys. Just live in the jungle. I'll fund us. You give me a nice plot of land, got a good retirement home. I want you to build a farm. I'll go travel the world and give you funds. Nope, too modern. Can't do it. Sorry, we can't do that anymore. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. So then they go move to a jungle in the far nether regions of the world, incomprehensible to get to. It took me very long time to even find remotely where they were, and the motorcycles and the fucking, that's another story. So they're out in the jungle now, and they need to live in loincloths. Okay, whatever, fine. They need to live in bamboo huts or wooden huts of some kind, and they need to be fully agrarian and self-reliant and have all of their own things, and they don't even use electricity because they can't generate it themselves. Okay, if you want to be Orthodox, we'll build you an Orthodox school, fine. If you want to be a liberal loser like I am and use technology, that's fine. I think with the alt-right, it's the same way, where you have a nation that is unified. Well, we're supposed to be unified by founding stock blood. We're all of the same race, where you and your very nice Celto Germanic family from Connecticut and my Mayflower stock, we're basically brothers, you and I. It doesn't matter where we disagree. We are of the same exact people trying to maintain a nation. Now, that's incredible. You, a Bernie bro. I bloody hate communists. I have spent years and years and years of my life only learning from my enemy. Do you think I enjoy coming home from a long day of lecturing Plato and popping open Pol Pot and seeing how he specifically killed every member of his civilization and damn them to hell? I don't like to spend all my time reading about communists, but my people are possessed by this radical leftist ideology. And it would be foolish of me to suggest, just because I hate them and just because I hate the idea, that I don't need to devote my life toward trying to purify my blood, so to speak. When I see my people possessed by an ideology, we need to be sure that we can ally together to free our people from this type of thought, so to speak. So when I see the progressives and I see the communists, as the dissident right does, and I try to make a revolutionary reaction, I loathe them, but at the same time, I feel a horrible sadness for them. And I feel a horrible sense of, I need to somehow do something that can prevent them from being disillusioned. I mean, when we think about transhumanism, it has uniquely affected the right and the left differently. The right engages in power fantasy, which inhibits their growth, and the left quite literally castrates themselves. They're more advanced in the religion than the right, for sure, where the apotheosis of leftist thought is to cut off your sex differences and become a total drone for the technological system. The right, and this is something I will not take sides on or comment on personally, but the experience that you are having with the dissident right, I believe, is you are saying, hee hee ha ha, you people are playing a surrogate activity. You're playing pretend. You're playing make believe. And the little pirate who says, I want to go sack Rome,
is saying, "Oh no, no, no! I'm really sacking Rome. You're actually ruining the theater performance. I've actually devoted my life to this type of character." And you say, "No, no, no! You're in a theater. This is all smoke and mirrors. This is very comical." And to the death, they will defend that. You must play a hierarchy game. If you do not play a hierarchy game, we will destroy you. How dare you trample upon our illusion? You are the enemy of my people, and we will absolutely do everything in our power to take you out. You see, the dissident right becomes very vicious when you say the charade is up. I see you.
Mm.
That is the technological possession of the right. I must get power. You have no power. You can't get power. And the dissident right again says, you must get power. Well, what are the people that are in power? What do they do? Well, they're all bought out by Israel. Okay. Okay. So everybody's bought out by Israel, and you think that you're not going to get bought out by a foreign power because you're so virtuous and wise. That's very cute. So everybody in human history, you're a secret Jew, you're bought out by Israel, you're bought out by a vaccine company. But me and my virtue, I would never participate in advancing a material benefit other than my own folk ideals to save my people. I work in the most corrupt, personally, I work in the most corrupt countries on earth that have blood ties of 1,000 years ago that define politics. All of my students every day, we come in, we talk philosophy, and I say, what's the problem with your nation? And they say, corruption, teacher. And I say, great. Well, when your families give you the government, are you going to be corrupt? No, teacher, we will not be corrupt. Well, what does it mean to not be corrupt and in a position of power? No one knows. Every day, no one knows. So I have to teach this class for years and years and years to give you a potential answer. Okay, that's nice. So I think this is all just a silly little thing. I think this is a silly little thing. And if people are serious, rather than having these constant splinterings upon splinterings upon splinterings, it's just the simple fact that we as Americans, we share a foundational race as a founding stock, and we need to adhere to our principles. And we need to say that we have a vast plague of ideological possession, and we are all prisoners in this. And we need a movement that unifies the extreme left and the extreme right together to create a movement that is focused on labor and self-production, a return to our traditions, a detachment from this horrible ideology of GDP advancement, this horrible ideology of letting invaders into our soil to mix our blood. This is not a call for rah white power. This is just to say the Americans are quite literally an ethnic people that are differentiated from other ethnicities, and that allows us the right to have our own traditions. But we can't just sit here and say 5 minutes ago in 1950, that is our tradition, that is our people, that is our ancestry. No. We have even before the founding fathers. I'm not talking about the founding fathers. I'm talking about the Germans who came over, the Belgians who came over, the French who came over. All of us who came in the 1600s developed our own tradition. In the 1700s, we fought a war to preserve that identity. All of our politicians, by the way, had a very deep tie to agrarian roots. Just to be clear, there's a nobility in maintaining the land. And in the 1800s, we expanded that and went westward. It was only what is the question of what is America without the frontier that we have finally and definitively answered in the 1900s, which is nihilism, which is meaningless, which is surrogate activity. And that we can just say, I don't want to do anymore and walk our own way. It's that simple. Doing is another thing. And this will take generations as a movement, but that's fine. If you want to be like with me and try to build a parallel movement and you're very serious about it, I am very happy to build a philosophy around it. And I am very happy to be your friend, and you are always welcome in my home.
Oh, and I think that that's a great call to action. And I agree with again, a lot of the points that you're making here, right? It's just like, look, it's not as I think you usually hold it like wingnatism or like we're going to take over the halls of power, any of this stuff. It's just largely a distraction from what needs to be done, which is building from the ground up, rebuilding these communities. And I think your point is extremely well taken, that things are going to be vastly more viable the more they are connected to our heritage, to our tradition, to who we were as people. And this isn't, again, like I think, a lot of people in the mainstream would kind of try to spin this as like, well, you're trying to be like a supremacist in this way or that way, or you're trying to, again, and I think like that's the way that the left villainizes this, is they always kind of take any like attempt to be proud of your heritage or to acknowledge hierarchy as some sort of kind of move for control or superiority or any of that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, this is just about truth and what is real and what is viable. And what is viable is understanding your history, your past, right, your ancestry, your heritage, as those are the things that are going to work, right? Those are the things that are Lindy, that are viable, that will resonate with you. You kind of mentioned blood memory, right? It's like there is an inextricable link that we have to the past through our genetics, and I think that it is you know, people say all the time, it's like, oh, America's an idea. It's like, that is just so woefully inaccurate. And it's, it's frustrating that we have to fight against that kind of psyop. But I mean, there's a lot of psyops that we're fighting against. And, I like to think that what is evolving right now, especially now that kind of like Trump is back in office, and a lot of people can't hide behind this, idea of like, oh, well, the reason that we can't fix things in the government is because we don't have the right people in the positions of power or something like that, right? And I think we're kind of in a situation where, especially, that was like the narrative on the dissident right for the longest time, and it's like, okay, well, now Trump's in power, and all of these things that you said need to happen or whatever aren't really happening. And so I think hopefully people are getting disillusioned with the idea that there is a potential for a top-down solution, and realizing, look, like, if you actually want change, you're going to have to do it yourself. And the truth of this is, it's not like we are all going to make it or we are all going to fail, right? There's no universal result for every single person. What is going to happen is some of us are going to make it and some of us aren't. And the thing that is going to distinguish the people, between who make it and who don't, are the people who are going to make it are the ones who are going to go out and they're going to take action, and they're going to find their communities, and they're going to build things, and they're going to reconnect with their heritage, and they're going to be, honest about, history and what's practical and what's real. And they're going to try to, cultivate good, healthy, positive knowledge and experience, and, culture and wisdom and all these kinds of things. Right. And, again, I think that we kind of started this conversation with the idea of like, look, there's a lot of potential paths up the mountain, and I am very excited to be around other people who, at the very least, are trying to climb the same mountain, right? I think that there's going to be a lot of learning for those who are kind of like approaching these things differently, right? Like, you have your friends who you mentioned are like much more extreme, where you're kind of like a little bit on kind of the in relationship to
I'm
them,
basically
right?
the Bernie bro of my friends because
Sure.
I use electricity. By the way,
Mm.
none of this is theatrical or using hyperbole. I mean, they literally, I'm unable to have friends because I use electricity. God forbid your family comes over to work with Edison to create light itself, and now you're
Mm.
damned to hell of loneliness forever in the fucking Central Asian steppe as a result. But I think something very important that you touched on, I'd like to leave you with, and this is something very interesting, I think, personally, for you to chew on, is again, thinking about the left and the right, you being a Bernie bro before. This is my diagnosis of leftists, particularly of your caliber, who seem quite intelligent. The leftist is possessed by ancestral blood memories of
Mm.
living on the frontier. Now, I know that they are possessed by that specific experience because they're very attracted to socialism and communism. And to the American, communism is just kind of like how we live. I'm not a proponent of communism. I very vehemently hate it, but like,
Mhm.
okay, like, we're having a settlement. We have to share resources to survive, or like a wolf is going to come in and kill us, and we have to build walls collectively together. Well, that's our tradition. That's how we live as a tribal population, where we're building settlements and we're moving from place to place. It's not like there's one lone cowboy and I'm going to go to California by myself. We took wagon trains in the Oregon Trail. We are always deeply connected with survival. Now, the American
Mhm.
version is we have free trade between groups, where I have a specialized skill set as a blacksmith and you make horses, you breed horses, and we're trading skills together. The leftist
Mhm.
wants that. He actually says, I'm very deeply divided from a community, and I see the only solution I am offered by my faggot professors is this ideal notion of Marxist communism. Of course, I'm going to be attracted to this ideology. I like to have friends and I like to have human connection. But because the only option I'm given, I'm sociologically provided, is a modern post 1800s system that advances technology, I will take that. And he's just disillusioned. He's just confused that he can't have his communities back. So it's almost like his ancestors are actually motivating his movements, but no one has told him this. And so he does some foreign near Asian philosophy. And the right has actually the same sort of idea as the left in our country, where the right says, I must retake the positions of power. These people are extremely aggressive. That's our American culture. We conquer everything. Wonderful. But rather than conquer an institution, we need to conquer land again. Why you wouldn't conquer an institution? Because as we have all seen, every politician gets bought out. That's okay. If you participate in the material world, of course, you're going to put your material needs beyond the needs of your people, and you're going to sacrifice your transcendental values that promote the flourishing of your ethnic folk with some other mechanism. That's just what happens. That's why Plato in his Republic suggested people should be removed from each other. The guardians need to be their own separate class, and they need to be barred from economics. The economics is a plebeian thing, not something to be venerated as the highest. And so when the rightists come in, the result of their ideology, as we see with the dissidents, is gay, unmarried, childless men. You have the same response as the highest form of leftism, which is genital mutilation. Your clan dies. I don't care if you're the best thinker in the world, not to critique Nietzsche too hard as the best thinker in the world, but he also didn't have children. Schopenhauer didn't have children. All the great philosophers never had children. So even if we're all the way on the right and we say participate in a position of power, you end your bloodline, which ends your folk, which ends the practice of your unique mentality and your ancestral history. We have to be clan focused. We have to have children. We have to have wives, and we need to overcome this homosexual fetishization of power fantasies and stop playing this little theater and say we're going to go outside and I'm going to start by building a chicken coop. After I build my chicken coop, God forbid, I'm going to plant seeds, heirloom seeds in the ground. I'm going to create a nobility around labor. And that's all we do.
I think that's a great point to land on.
Sure.
Yeah, so I appreciate you coming on. This has been a fantastic conversation. It sounds like you're doing some really interesting stuff. Where can people follow up if they're interested in getting in touch or reading more of your work?
Well, so far I've been banned from every platform, from YouTube to Pinterest. Don't know how I got banned from Pinterest, whatever. But the only thing I seem to be allowed on is Twitter. You can follow me at Rogues Philosophy, Rogues Philo, or you can also enchant me with the follow or a subscription over on Substack. I currently sell nothing. I have no interest in economic pursuits at this time. However, in the future, once the internet deems me worthy and I get a substantial following with my ideas, I am very, very happy to provide two services. One, building an online school for my Luddite right or traditionalist or Mennonite imperial movement. That's my goal. So I will love in the future, maybe a year or so, to create an online school with a suite of products that teaches thinkers from Evola to Jacques Ellul to Nietzsche, giving lectures that are college level so you can learn how to implement practically all of the great beyond right thinkers that we have in our Western tradition, as well as tourism. I love working with tribal populations. It's my favorite thing. I've got tribes over in Vietnam. I've got tribes in Kyrgyzstan. I'm working with all of these people all around the world. And we would love if we could bring you here to do some experiences and men's retreats and all of these sort of excursions, running with our nomad crews on horseback and learning eagle hunting and trying to see what tribal life would look like in Vietnam, so that you personally could bring the ideas back to the West and say, we can actually build a thriving clan-based sort of feudal system. And this is how the nomads did it. And this is how the Vietnamese tribes do it. And doing that type of tourism would just tickle me pink. So anybody interested in those projects, give me a follow on X. I'm very loquacious. I love to talk. So message me anytime.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's been great. I think that there's a lot of people who, are always very hesitant to reach out because they're like, who's got the time, and but I find that if you have the right enthusiasm and interest, most people out there are pretty responsive. So I definitely encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to Rogue here. But thanks again, for coming on. This has been a great conversation. Looking forward to definitely collaborating in the future. I have some people in my network who I think would be very interested to chat with you. So hopefully we can set that up. But in the meantime, just remember, if you're listening, it's never over and we've never been more back. We'll catch you in the next one.
I do